Okay, let's move on to Jae Crowder
Yeah.
requesting a trade from the Phoenix Suns. He's not going to be a training camp. He is, I guess, just unhappy with, it seems like, his role as much as anything else in Phoenix. I mean, he literally tweeted an Instagram video of a hype video, like requesting a trade. That's like an all-time move, I feel like. Shout out Jae Crowder. Uh, Jae Crowder is a useful piece. Like, I think that he's always gone a little bit underrated by the analytics community. Like, I know, is a bit inconsistent as a shooter, but brings a whole lot of toughness, is a good defender, at least in terms of, sliding down and being able to deal with more physical players. I like it. Like, I think that he's a useful piece. If I was Phoenix, I'd be very disappointed with this outcome, because I think he's the kind of guy that helps you compete. And this is a team that ostensibly, like, even in light of everything that's going on with them organizationally, this is a team that's trying to compete. They have the talent to win a title right now.
It's strange things going on there in Phoenix, right? Like Crowder, he just turned 32, so he's not necessarily in his prime anymore, but his game, because of its physicality and the intangibles and the motor that he brings to the table, he's going to be able to bring it every night. Like Phoenix is a 64-win team that is now losing a guy that started every game for them last year. That's going to be challenging to replace just in a one-for-one type of deal on the trade market. Again, hard to know exactly what's going on, what led to Crowder's request, as well as it's always hard to gauge just how upset he is, because he tweets everything in caps lock. So like, there's a lot to sift through with exactly what's going on there, but some contender should want him. And I know we can go back and forth on to who might be a good fit, or the logistics of being able to acquire him. He still has a little bit in the tank to be able to give to the right team that just spaces him in the corner and says, go out there and rough up the other team's best wing offensive player for 25 to 30 minutes a night.
Okay, so let's dive into some teams that I think make some sense. The first team that immediately stood out to me is Dallas. This is the kind of piece that I think Dallas could really use. A floor spacer, tough guy, fits their defensive scheme in terms of really liking the switchability that Jason Kidd really brought to the table last year with the Dallas Mavericks. They have a contract that matches relatively well with Dwight Powell. I think he's making right around 11 million. Jae Crowder, by the way, is right around 10 million. So a fairly easy number to match. There are just a lot of players that make around 10 million because Jae Crowder was a mid-level exception guy. There are certainly a lot of guys around the league that are mid-level exception players. So I think that you could do something like Dwight Powell and, maybe a future facing pick, maybe like a late first that's very heavily protected, like top 25 protected in the first round, that becomes 2 seconds or something like that. But Dwight Powell also, like, sneaky could give the Phoenix Suns a couple of minutes here and there through as like a backup center. This is a team that doesn't exactly have a great option behind DeAndre Ayton. And this is a team that obviously with DeAndre Ayton loves to run as many ball screens with their big diving to the rim as possible. That's like Dwight Powell's one real skill. Like, he is a legit smart screener, rim runner to the basket. That's one that, like, really genuinely makes a lot of sense to me just across the board. Like, if I was Phoenix, I could get an additional asset. I could get a guy that maybe makes some roster sense for me. Doesn't help my team, but I think it's going to be hard for them to do something that actually helps the team when acquiring or when moving Jae Crowder, given that this is a team that's competing now.
Yeah, and they've lost a lot of leverage by the fact that Crowder's already kind of sitting out in camp in that regard. Dallas was the first team that came to my mind, too, in trying to find the right destination for where Crowder would be useful. I think Dwight Powell going back makes a lot of sense. Another sneaky aspect to this, though, Sam, this is a Cam Johnson contract year, is it not?
It is. Yeah. So, I mean, if I was Phoenix, I would be trying to sign Cam Johnson very, very much right now.
Yes.
To an extension. And if I was Cam Johnson, it'd take a big number. It'd take a big number given what, given that people I think don't really recognize that Cam Johnson is fairly old for a guy entering his 4th year. This is really Cam Johnson's, like, he'll turn 27 in March. This is Cam Johnson's like major chance to get paid in a big way. He needs to maximize his contract value right now. It would take a big number if I was Cam Johnson in terms of being willing to take an extension right now from Phoenix.
And particularly because minutes are now opening up more for him, maybe a starting role. He gets just a little bit more touches because Crowder's out of the way, particularly if you're talking about a deal with Dallas that would not bring back another wing in return. I think that that's one area that Phoenix just doesn't have a ton of depth right now. And
on top of it, how much does the developing ownership situation with Robert Sarver finally being willing to sell the team following the revelations of his, essentially racist and misogynist behavior as the owner of the Phoenix Suns, as shown by the report commissioned by the NBA? How much does the sale of the team impact a potential extension for Cam Johnson? I don't know. Like, is it a situation where the owners of the team, because it's split in a lot of different directions, like Robert Sarver owns 35%, and there's like a big group that kind of owns quite a bit. Is it a situation where they're like, let this be the next guy's problem with Cam Johnson in terms of, we'll, sign him to a $20 million a year extension and just lock him in and make him happy so that we can try and win a title this year? Or is it a situation where they want to maximize as much value as possible, and Cam Johnson on a $20 million a year contract doesn't make sense when trying to sell the team? These are the kind of things that like really come into play in these negotiations. And it's fascinating. I came up with another one that just matches in terms of salary for Jae Crowder. Danny Green is on a $10 million a year this year contract for the Memphis Grizzlies. They got Danny Green in the DeAnthony Melton deal, where they also acquired the number 23 overall pick, which they used on David Roddy, 24 overall pick maybe. Danny Green and like a heavily protected first that turns into multiple seconds or something. Like, here's the thing: if you're Memphis, is Danny Green a little bit more valuable to you than Jae Crowder? Because if you think Danny Green is going to be back for March, April, something like that, and if you're Phoenix, by the way, this whole thing also stands to reason as well. Is Danny Green a little bit more helpful for you if you think that he is going to come back healthy by the time the playoffs start?
So if I'm Phoenix, I think that Danny Green is valuable in the fact that he's just a little more reliable floor spacer around Chris Paul. And I think that that's a proven track record to be able to win games. If I'm Memphis, I actually would prefer Crowder. And the biggest reason for that is the early season times when Jaren Jackson might be out of the lineup. Having another guy who can come in there, play the four, defend physically, is going to help them bridge that gap early on. I think the Western Conference at the top this year figures to be a bloodbath with Denver, with the Clippers getting a little bit healthier. The Grizzlies need to win every game that they can in the regular season. They're a team that's built for that anyway, just with their mental makeup. But Crowder fits in that regard intangibly, but helps fill a little bit of a need in the earlier part of the season.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good call. I mean, I kind of dig it. The Portland Trailblazers, and by the way, we should mention John Morant also like is seemingly campaigning a little bit to get Jae Crowder on Twitter. He had a little, I think he said like back soon or something like that on Twitter. The Portland Trailblazers, I think, make a lot of sense. Portland trying to compete, team that could use more depth. If I remember correctly, I believe they they don't have a trade exception anymore, but they have some contracts that like you could theoretically align, like if you wanted to do is like maybe like Nasir Little and Justice Winslow gets you pretty close, or no, not Justice. It'd have to be like Nasir Little and no, you could do Nasir and Justice Winslow, I think, couldn't you? Something like that, or like Nasir Little and Keon Johnson and like a minimum or something like that would get you really close in terms of the number. If you don't want to move Josh Hart, which I wouldn't want to move Josh Hart. I think Josh Hart's just better than Jae Crowder at this point. Portland, I think, makes a lot of sense. Maybe like the Suns like Nasir Little and some of these guys, right? Maybe you wouldn't have to give up a pick in that scenario.
Yeah.
Just every single team that's competing. Like I think the Miami Heat could use another guy that's tough. Crowder's obviously worked really well before in Miami. It's hard to find the salaries that like totally work in Miami necessarily, but maybe you could find a way to get a third team involved if you really wanted him. Like the Milwaukee Bucks, like could the Bucks find a way to go get Jae Crowder and bring like that PJ Tucker element that they kind of missed a little bit last year, I thought. In terms of, again, the number, it's kind of hard to get there for the Bucks, unfortunately, but and they don't really have they don't have a trade exception that like really makes sense for them. It's a little bit harder to find like the exact spot than you would think for Jay, even though there are a lot of guys around the league that are on mid-level exceptions. A lot of those guys are valued to their teams and they don't necessarily want to give them up. But Dallas is the one that makes sense. Is there another one for you that makes sense?
I think like Brooklyn kind of stands out to me. Again, I don't know the mechanism for going out in a way of acquiring him, but just another tougher front court, like wing defender that would alleviate some of the pressures from, Kevin Durant in the postseason. But a lot of that's going to depend on kind of the health of a guy like TJ Warren. Like I don't know what to expect from him this year. If TJ Warren looks pretty good and bubble TJ Warren is who we're getting, then like Crowder wouldn't really move the needle too much.
Here's a weird one for me. What if the Suns moved Crowder in a bigger deal to go get someone like Harrison Barnes? Use Crowder as like the big salary number, then tossed in Dario Saric or something like that to get to the Barnes number. And then they moved like a first round pick to get Harrison Barnes. You get Jae Crowder for a team that's like trying to compete now. Jay is going to take up a little bit less offensive usage than Harrison Barnes theoretically would, which allows you to get Keegan Murray a little bit more involved even offensively. You have the Sabonis and De'Aaron Fox combination is going to take up a ton of your minutes. You have Kevin Huerter already. You have Malik Monk. You have a lot of shot creation as it is. Maybe Phoenix is willing to toss you a future asset in order to get a Harrison Barnes or something like that. Like, I wonder if, Phoenix is Sacramento trying to compete now. I don't know like how interested they are, but if they think that maybe there's not a big of a difference between Harrison Barnes and Jae Crowder for our particular situation as, maybe Phoenix does between Jae Crowder and Harrison Barnes, maybe that's something that like you could make a case for. But again, Sacramento wants to compete now. It'd be all dependent upon Sacramento thinking like the difference there is not enormous, I think.
Yeah, I actually really like that hypothetical deal that you proposed there. The Saric inclusion, or just having him around as another piece to maybe bundle with Jae Crowder, really changes the elements here for what Phoenix is or is not going to do. So obviously that's one to monitor, but we mentioned it a little bit earlier. Like who's really calling the shots and can make decisions on extensions, on trades? Like what owner is going to be able to approve this? That makes me wonder how long this might really drag out. Is this something that we're expecting to be resolved by the time the first game of the season is played, given the fact that the Suns are just saying he's not going to be here for training camp? Or is this going to be something that potentially drags out longer until we have a solution on the ownership side?
And then the other one that I kind of wondered about was, is there like a Seth Curry for Jae Crowder move? You brought up Brooklyn in our little chat, maybe Seth Curry and a pick for Jae Crowder. Crowder helps them a little bit defensively. They have like Seth Curry. You can make a case that you can kind of make up for all of his shooting production with the return of Joe Harris, with Patty Mills being around again. Maybe you want another wing again. Like this is a team that, has TJ Warren, as you mentioned, and has, another guy in Royce O'Neal that they acquired for a first round pick this past year. I don't know. Like that's one that it at least caught my eye. If Brooklyn wants to try and hold this thing together for one more year and then see what happens.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's Brooklyn's just a weird team to me because not only could they implode at any second with a lot of the volatility that's going on there, but like you
Yeah.
said, the Harris and Seth Curry overlap. I think that there's some overlap with guys like Warren or even Ben Simmons and Royce O'Neal, of these kind of like less than desirable shooters who might have to space the floor around Durant and Kyrie when they go nuclear. There's just a lot to work through with Brooklyn. I think Crowder helps, depending on who they would be sending out in that type of deal.
Yeah. And just trying to find like another landing spot. There are a lot of teams here. I don't think that Phoenix is going to have an issue moving Jae. It seems like it'll happen before the season, just based off of everything. You don't have a guy sit out while you're trying to work on a trade and then have that reported, without that seemingly coming to fruition relatively soon. So I would think we're going to get conclusion here semi soon, but we'll see. That's just speculation on my part. I don't really have insight into that. That's just kind of a guess on how these things move forward, right?
Yeah, and again, who's calling the shots in all of this? Who ends up making the final call? So Phoenix is just a weird spot right now.